head of the Prospect Park United Methodist Church community. It's Pastor Paul here, and I'm doing something a little different today. As I was preparing for the sermon, the reflection in worship on February 2nd, we were dealing with a passage in Luke 6, which has to do with the Sabbath and things Jesus is doing and maybe should or shouldn't be doing on the Sabbath. And it struck me that I felt the need to teach a little bit around Sabbath and around the way in which Christianity has dealt with and spoken about and done this concept of Sabbath in ways that are a little bit reductive, perhaps culturally appropriative, and while not intending to do so, while it's all been in good intentions, I think there's some things we need to understand about how Sabbath operates in a lot of Jewish communities, so that we can maybe honor and respect their view on it a little more, because it is so important. But it was all too much to put into the sermon for one day, especially on a communion Sunday. So I wanted to just take a couple minutes here to go over a couple things about Sabbath that I think we should understand. And that is first this: largely, we Christians don't know what we're talking about when we're talking about Sabbath. And in doing so, we can cheapen what Sabbath really is. And like I said, even step into cultural appropriation in our lack of understanding of what it actually is. When it comes down to it, we Christians generally do not remember or keep the Sabbath holy to any degree. The denomination that probably does the most, but also has a whole host of other kinds of problems around it, are the Seventh-day Adventists. But largely, we don't really remember the Sabbath and keep it holy in terms of what that fourth commandment in the scriptures is really talking about. Sabbath is not just some little addendum in the Jewish faith. It is everything. Everything revolves around it. Their entire calendar revolves around it. There is a sentiment in Judaism that says that more so than Israel, and that is the people, the Jewish people, not just the nation, but more so than Israel holds the Sabbath holds Israel. It is not really just about not working. That's what we think it's about, is just not working. It is a total reorienting of our work and our community. That's what's going on in Sabbath, among other things. Sabbath rules are maybe strict, seemingly, and in some ways they are, but they're not arbitrary. They are meant to drive people into community, into deeper community than they already have been. And I think what I want to outline here is one of the great examples of how the Sabbath rules do this for the Jewish people. There's a way in which we can understand that through one of those rules, just how it drives people into community. It can seem arbitrary and rigid and archaic to us, but when you really look at the outcomes, there's some pretty amazing things that happen around the Sabbath rules. And there's way too many to go over, but I wanted to just do one. And that is this kind of strange rule. And I can't find the rationale for it. I think it has something to do with the building of the temple, but I'm not sure. But there's a rule on the Sabbath that many Jews today still abide by, and that is that you cannot carry anything from a private domain to a public domain and then back to a private domain. You can't do that. You can't carry anything. And by carry, I mean, that means you can't carry it unless you're on a kibbutz or something like that, which is all kind of one big private domain. If you're going to go to temple, if you're going to go to synagogue, you can't carry your keys. You can't carry your purse, your wallet. You can't even carry your child. So unless you're living in like a closed community like a kibbutz, which is all going to have the temple worship, and not temple worship, but they're going to go to shul and all of that, all on the kibbutz. It's going to all be private domain. There's not a problem there. But when you look at life in America today, there's a huge problem. If you're living on Princeton Avenue in St. Louis Park, and I name that for a reason that'll become clear in a second, and you need to get to Bethel Synagogue, and that's depending on where you are, it's a pretty walkable distance, but you're leaving your private domain to go onto a public domain, and therefore you can't carry anything. So how in the world can you actually get to shul, get to synagogue? You can't, because you can't not carry anything, really, when it comes down to it. So what the rabbis have done has created this thing called an eruv. And an eruv becomes this, there's very, very specific boundaries and borders around an entire area or neighborhood. And within the eruv, that kind of becomes established over Shabbat as a kind of private domain for the whole community, so that you can walk to shul and to synagogue and carry your child and carry not your car keys, but your house keys, carry your wallet, your purse, whatever it is you might need. And so it seems maybe like a loophole, like, oh, so you just like created this little thing. And maybe there's some truth to that. There are some Jewish communities that don't even recognize the eruv as a valid thing, but many do. But it's also done very meticulously and carefully. The Jewish community works with municipalities and utility companies because they hang wires and use the utility wires and such to mark the boundaries. They work very closely with those municipalities to make sure that's all set and solid and working. Rabbis are praying over it. There's a very spiritual element to it as well. And what it does is, like I said, it enables people to go to shul. But what it also does is this: because if there's an eruv built and set up somewhere, what happens is Jews from all over will come to move into those neighborhoods. So that they can get to shul and synagogue and those types of things. And the result that comes out of that are these little Jewish enclaves that exist all over the country and I think the world. And it becomes this beautiful sense of community. This is part of the reason St. Louis Park is so famous for its Jewish community, is that we have a pretty significant eruv in our town that also dips into the western edge of Minneapolis a little bit as well. And it's created this Jewish enclave, and it's beautiful, and it's this huge asset to our community. And by that, I mean, you don't just have Jewish residents in these eruvs. Out of them come Jewish kosher grocery stores and kosher restaurants. And this whole kind of city within a city almost can start to arise out of these. And there becomes this really beautiful sense of community that really matters to a lot of people, and becomes an asset even for the people beyond the Jewish community, which we experience here in St. Louis Park. And all of that is to say that it can also sound like this is creating a really like insular, cut off, cut off society, but that's not the case at all. Non-Jews can live within the eruv as well, because it really is public domain. But for this time, it becomes this one sort of communal private domain that everybody shares. And I tell you, I've biked through the eruv on Shabbat before, and it's beautiful. People are out in their yards when the weather's nice, and the kids are playing football and baseball and running around, and families are together, and it becomes this community. And the reason I say all of that is that what Shabbat is really about is community. That's kind of its core and its heart. That's what it's meant to build. A rabbi friend of mine talks about when he's traveling sometimes, and he's in a hotel on Shabbat, and you can't really get to a synagogue depending on where he is and how things work. He's trying to do Shabbat in his hotel room, but he says it still ain't Shabbat. Why? Because the community's not there. And that's the way in which I think we Christians often really miss what Sabbath is. We say we're taking a Sabbath, and often when we do that, it becomes a me day, right? You might go to the spa. You might go on a hike by yourself. You may also spend time with family and such things like that, but it largely means I'm taking a day of rest for myself. And that's a good thing to do. That's healthy. Like, do that. But maybe let's not call it Sabbath, because that's not what true Sabbath is really about. Sabbath is a day that belongs to the Jews, and it is everything to them, and it is what holds their community together. And so we don't want to cheapen that word by applying it to our little me days and things like that, which, like I said, are very good things to do that can be very healthy. And so I just wanted to throw that out there because I think it's important to understand when we start looking at what Jesus is doing around Sabbath, which is thick throughout the scriptures, but there's more in it than I really had space for to do in the reflection. So I wanted to throw this out there for anybody who's interested, for just like a little extra, like bonus material. And also I just wanted to say this, that like I said, I know I talk about St. Louis Park a lot, but I live there, I serve there, I'm a city council person there, and I love it. And part of what I love about it is the Eruv. I'm going to put up a map here to just kind of show you geographically where that is in St. Louis Park. And you can kind of see where those boundaries are. It kind of dips right into that Cedar Lake neighborhood in Minneapolis. The St. Louis Park City Hall is also right in the middle of the Eruv as well. There's tons of synagogues. There's kosher restaurants. There's all the things I was talking about. And any day of the week, you will see very Torah observant Jews walking around, but especially on Shabbat. And it's kind of a beautiful scene. And it also means that we as a city have to do work to protect them, because that neighborhood can become a target of anti-Semitism as well, because people know there's a lot of Jews that live there. Now, I'm going to put up another map because there's another Eruv in the Twin Cities area that's very near Prospect Park and the Highland Park neighborhood, which I'm sure many of you know about. It's a little bit smaller, but no less significant. And so here you can see the boundaries around that. And that's another beautiful, little Jewish enclave in the middle of our great city and metro area. And so I just wanted to point all that out to you because I think it's important for us to understand all of it in terms of cultural understanding, and to also understand like where these areas are in our very own midst, because it's very real, it's very important, and I think it's very beautiful. And so that's all I wanted to do, was just throw this together for anybody who is interested in maybe understanding a little bit more about how Shabbat can work and how these rules that are many. There's 39 different categories of work that you can't do on the Sabbath. And understand that even though Jesus appears to be challenging them a lot in his work in the Gospels, which we're going to continue to see in the Gospel of Luke, he is not really challenging Sabbath. He's challenging, and I spoke to this a little bit in my message, the ways in which sometimes those rules can be used to oppress, which is a violation of Sabbath, because Sabbath is supposed to be something that draws you into community and that feeds life. And so I just wanted to help us understand that a little bit more about why these things that Jesus does on Shabbat, on the Sabbath in the scriptures may seem kind of little to us, but they're actually really big. They're very important. And there actually is a good reason why the religious authorities of the day were struggling with it. Because if you open things up too much, then Shabbat, Sabbath, can become so porous that you can kind of lose it. And so there's a really delicate balance in living into it by the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, and having the two work together to get to the point where it really is life-giving and builds community. So just wanted to throw that out there. Have a great week, beloved. And who knows, maybe I'll do some more of these little addendums to the sermon. I enjoy doing it. If you do as well, let me know, because I'll keep doing it. Have a great week, and we'll catch you next time.